During the Atlantic slave trade, which lasted 400 years, 2.5 million people were seized from their homes in West Africa and transported to the United States to become chattel slaves. Since then, art and media have visually represented African American men and boys. Black people had little freedom to express themselves in this time and had to tolerate inaccurate and racist representations by white people. Slowly, as slavery was abolished and the Harlem Renaissance began, more African American art and media was produced, attempting to undo centuries of bias spread into white people. During the Civil Rights era, the predominantly negative image of black men was challenged and began to change to one of respect and unity. Though improvements were made, the struggle for black rights continues in a different way today. During the 19th century, propaganda helped instill a negative bias toward black men and boys at a young age. Children's books such as Little Black Sambo, Bullseye Bill, and My Honey's ABCs are examples of this racist indoctrination. The characters in these books feature skin colored with exaggerated blackness and faces with huge eyes and lips. This strategy was employed to make black people seem as different from white people as possible, therefore justifying the horrendous treatment imposed on them. My Honey's ABCs exemplifies this depiction of blacks and teaches kids to be biased from the time they're able to read. Bullseye Bill depicts young black boys as sneaky and scheming. The boys in the books are shown harassing a white farmer by throwing apples at him. Bill is called Bullseye Bill because he's always in the middle of everything. The implications of these images show how black boys is wild and in the way. Little Black Sambo focuses on illustrating blacks as otherworldly savages. The main character, Little Black Sambo, is a young black boy that received new clothes, shoes, and an umbrella from his mother. Several tigers confront him and want to eat him, but he convinces the tigers otherwise by bribing them and giving away his mother's gifts. Little Black Sambo characterizes young black boys as barbarians that cannot have nice things. The imagery in texts like these fueled a racist bias beginning in youth and continuing into adulthood. In the 1800s, art and media served an oppressive white agenda. Kemble's sketchbook shows the obvious contrast between the portrayal of white and black figures. Black men are depicted as menacing and frightening with large, devious smiles. The angles of their faces appear harsher as the artist draws them emerging from shadows. The white men drawn in the same book appear friendly and strong. An image of a black man shows him holding alcohol on the side of the street, and images of white men show them in various jobs and in dignified clothing. Pamphlets were easy to distribute for propaganda, popular during this time. The worst representation of black men may have been the scientific pamphlets. These pamphlets featured images of a Greek person's skull, an African American skull, and a chimpanzee's skull, saying that African Americans were somewhere in between the two. This theory of classification allowed white people to categorize an entire race as more animal than human. They could then justify the horrendous treatment imposed on the slaves. These images were published in a time when black men and boys did not have the ability to represent themselves. Slaves were not allowed to read and write and could be punished with death or beatings if found breaking this rule. This meant almost the entirety of the race was left to stand and observe in silence. Some free black men and abolitionist white people fought back against art and media's negative imagery. Poets like Paul Laurence Dunbar used his influence to more accurately portray his race. He used actual photographs of African American beside poetry in his books. Howdy, honey, howdy. The men are formally dressed and respectable, usually having dinner, taking a woman on a date, or working. Instead of photos, some artists utilize sketches. In the book Plantation Sketches, black men and boys are more accurately represented. Their features and coloring are not exaggerated like the figures in Bullseye Bill, and they are also not drawn to appear intimidating, but shown doing daily activities similar to those in Dunbar's books. It seems as though most black artists simply wanted to be viewed as regular people who do the same things as everyone else. The images in the Anti-Slavery Almanac of 1838, 39, and 40 use a different approach to redefine negative bias surrounding blacks. These drawings include shocking scenes of cruelty and slavery. One shows a black man hung from a tree with a caption explaining he exposed himself to starvation and cold in an attempt to free himself from the bondage of slavery, hung himself to avoid ever having to go back. Another illustration shows a family with 2 kids and a mother being restrained as the father is sold to a different buyer. A third shows a slave tied up with his wrists over his head and feet strapped and stapled to the ground, being brutally beaten. Some white artists also use a similar approach to expose the harsh realities of slavery. George Moreland's painting, Execrable Human Traffic, depicts the scene of a West African family weeping and fearful as an indifferent and cruel white man seized them from their homes. Another artist, Ira Crow, would attend slave auctions and sketch what he saw. Often this would make the audience uncomfortable and they would stop bidding and he would be asked to leave. Despite this, he remembered what he saw and would turn inhumane scenes into masterful paintings that would be seen by many. Knowing his audience, Crow Europeanized the slave's physiognomy to make the paintings even more relatable to white viewers. He dispelled current white conception of slavery and replaced it with sad realities of innocent families anxiously waiting in fear. The Slavery Almanac, Moreland, and Crow forced the realities of slavery on white viewers, shocking them and inspiring guilt and change. Toward the beginning of the 20th century and after the abolition of slavery, black men were finally provided opportunities to express themselves. New York was a magnet for thousands of black people fleeing the oppression of the South. Harlem, in particular, was a mecca for black activity and hosted an eruption of newspapers, journals, and magazines like the Crisis, Sneaker World, Opportunity, and The Messenger. The Survey Graphic, the most popular magazine in the 1920s, dedicated an issue to Harlem and the New Negro movement. This movement began in an effort to defeat stereotypes and reinvent the African American image as professional, educated, and respectable. The images used in this magazine portray blacks with dignity and express the political, economic, and social desires for equality. Racism remained, however, and these texts were countered with continuing negativity from whites. The Birth of a Nation was a popular silent propaganda film from 1915 that showed whites playing black roles with black makeup covering their faces. Black men were depicted as dangerous and aggressive toward women. They were shown as villains invading towns and abducting people, and the Ku Klux Klan would save the day. Though African Americans gained freedom of expression, racism and bias still thrived. Art and media was a tool for devastation and progress in the era of slavery. Children were indoctrinated into racist values at a young age with exaggerated negative stereotypes. This bias continued into adulthood. Some black artists attempted to portray their race more positively and accurately, but had limited freedom to do so. Abolitionist whites used their influence in art to expose the cruel reality of slavery. As more blacks gained freedom of expression, their voices were still not heard, and moving forward, the civil rights movement had a large challenge.
The time period that I will be focusing on is the representation of African American men through the 60s and 70s. The perception of the way men were depicted prior to this era lacked consistent visual imagery of strong black men. Men were not often visually captured when they were cleaned up in a suit with a freshly shaved face. Even young boys were shown in physical positions that showed that they were not the most confident, with their hands covering their mouths as we see here. Not only that, but it almost looked as if they were hopeless and desperately calling out for help and for guidance that they were not receiving in their own community. The time for mistreatment for the African American community had come to an end. A revolution was coming. It was in the 60s where pictures of men in suits became a major phenomenon. Through this era, strong black leaders such as Martin Luther King Jr. came onto the scene and took this country by a storm. In a text from the OU archives, The Poor People's Campaign, we see leader Martin Luther King Jr. behind the podium talking to and listening to the demands of everyday citizens. It is in this text where we also see a march that took place in the middle of a street in the inner city. The massive amount of African Americans standing and marching united is breathtaking. We see Coretta Scott King in the front alongside strong men dressed in dress shirts and suits. This is a very important visual image to have published because although conditions may not be the best, the African American community still sticks together and continues to march on. What I loved about photos that were also in this text was that they showed another positive image of African American men that prior to this period was not being shown, the working man. The first example was this picture that shows a man who has taken the path of construction. Because this one man is being surrounded by a group of another men cheering, whatever he is building is clearly significant to the African American community. We also have this photo here of an African American male doctor. Many times, most African American boys do not aspire to attain certain positions or careers because of the lack of representation in that particular field. In this text, a wide spectrum of reputable forms of employment were seen. Since Africans were first brought to these United States, we saw firsthand the destruction of the black family. During the 60s, the stigma had begun to be addressed and taken action to eliminate it. In this text, we see pictures of black men holding babies as well as teaching younger boys the way of their particular trade. This is so important to see because, again, representation matters. This is not only beneficial for black boys to see, but also for black men to see, to encourage them to continue to be great fathers, husbands, leaders, and role models, or to pick up the torch to begin to make a difference in their own community. In addition to texts that were being produced, African American newspapers were also very influential during this time period. During the 60s, there was a newspaper published in New Orleans called Inside New Orleans. In this particular edition, published May 1st, 1965, major important themes such as success in sports and higher education, the importance and significance of the church, and also the recurring theme of being in uniform through professional dress was seen. For African Americans, college did not seem like it could be an option for them. However, avenues like sports were able to open the door. I was also able to pull from another newspaper, The Bulletin, based in Chicago, Illinois, that showcased the importance of education in its paper in several different editions. Here we see a particular focus on early childhood education. which is important for parents to see to make sure that their children are enrolled. After the assassination of both Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, a radical activist group known as the Black Panther Party were the new players in town. What made the Panthers so radical was that they stood for self-defense, exercising their right to bear arms, and providing for their own community through supporting and starting black businesses. Mainly members could be identified because they would usually wear all black. Usually the men would have some type of beret on their heads, while both women and men embraced their natural hair in the form of an afro. One of the many successful things that came from this party was their newspaper. The Panthers were aware that not all of their readers were actually able to read. However, they still wanted to reach out to those people by showing them that being a Panther was honorable, tough, and nothing to be ashamed of or to go against. Here's a clip from the film Panther, produced in 1995, that further explains.
Where the hell is Judge?
I think but the judge needs our support right now, not our suspicion. Oh, this is beautiful. Folks ain't never seen no truth like this before.
Right on.
Huey, check this out.
It was with all the shit, Aldrin.
See, we can no longer let the white media control our image. We got to let the brothers know what we're all about ourselves.
Get your ass up.
Yeah, well, that's what our newspaper would do.
Oh, no, so see, a lot of brothers don't read, dig? So we got to give them a stronger image.
Yeah, well, then shouldn't this be everybody? Hey, Tyrone, get your ass in here.
Trust me, man. This picture be worth 1,000 words. Now, have you given any thought to that Peace and Freedom Party thing? They really want to hook up with us. We've been invited to their rally, and they could broaden our base of visibility.
What's Brother Jamal think?
I think the poor black folks are fighting for their humanity, and the poor white folks are fighting for more money. I mean, the white boys can get a haircut and join the establishment. But us, we're black forever.
Sister Emma, you care to share your thoughts with us?
Well, the FBI's leaning on our printer looking for an excuse to cancel the contract. And the deadline for the next issue of the paper is tomorrow. Circulation is up, 125,000 and rising. We're seizing the time.
The time, my friends, is what Sartre called the moment the match is put to the fuse. Now, the question is the hand holding the match black or white?
All right, no full-fledged alliance. Brother Bobby Seale's got 3 more months to do, but we will accept the rally invitation.
I know you right.
All right, Brother Eldridge, set it up.
Look like a warrior.
The photo seen from the clip Panther of Huey P. Newton graced the cover of several different pamphlets, newspapers, and other methods of propaganda. Through this time period, we see the use of one fist being balled up and held high in the air, tons of marches and signs, guns on hips, and many, many afros. Although it was still hard being black in America, African Americans began relying on each other more than ever before and embracing their roots. For better or for worse, the black community sought out and fought for one another. Although the Panther Party meets its demise during the early 70s, the fight for equal rights and fair treatment of African American people continued. African American newspapers were still thriving and keeping the positive image of African Americans circulating. As time progressed, we began seeing more African Americans wanting to run and hold political offices. The Chicago Metro newspaper, a paper based in Chicago, Illinois, shows us an example of how African American candidates utilized these African American newspapers for campaigning. All in all, during the 60s and 70s, we see a shift of the representation of African American men in media leaning in a more positive direction. Positive images such as being clean and polished and how you present yourself, the importance of family, education, and working were all seen in massive amounts. Representation is key. As mentioned in the clip Panther, not all people were able to read. More often than not, a photo was able to speak more volume than any book, article, or written propaganda could ever express. Positive representation in media is key in order to help promote self-love, pride in your people, and hope in your future as well as the future for others.
The visual representation of black men and boys from the 1990s to the present can be examined from a few areas where images of black men are mostly prominent, such as sports, hip-hop, and drug-related crimes. The life of some African American people who moved from the South to Columbus, Ohio in the 1940s, and the roles of African American men were captured in a book called A Street Called Home that was published in 1997. The book genuinely recaps the sustainable community that those African Americans built and takes on a neutral perspective with a particular focus on the important roles that black men took within the community. For example, the Iceman. Children run behind the Iceman truck, reaching in for chips of ice. The Iceman carries a 100-pound block on his back right into your house for your icebox. He drives up and down the street and all around, and whenever the Iceman comes to deliver, the pigeon friends come down. Another example is the Umbrella Man. The Umbrella Man goes door to door and he goes up and down Mount Vernon Avenue, and his umbrellas make a clanking ring sound. He has his hat on funny and twisted. His hat and his sad face and the wrinkles on his brow make you know he's a sad man, a strong man and bewildered. Hip-hop was originally formed in the 1970s as a subcultural movement by African American, Caribbean, and Latino youth in New York City. Its popularity grew rapidly throughout the next couple of decades. The image of black males associated with hip-hop helped create another prominent stereotype. The gold chains, baggy jeans, and tattoos became a mainstay of young African American men. Many hip-hop artists perpetuate the stereotypes of urban black youths that are involved in criminal activities. Use lyrics from Mobb Deep's Shook Ones as an example. The music video for this song depicts many young black men in the hood in a very stereotypical fashion. Richard Sherman is one of the most outspoken and controversial black athletes who has been overt on many racism-related issues. There have been many stories about him in the news that contribute to the negative stereotypes of black men. In the 2014 NFC Championship game, the Seahawks cornerback gave an outspoken and heated interview to reporter Aaron Andrews, criticizing the skills of 49ers wide receiver Michael Crabtree.
Let's send you down to the field and Aaron Andrews.
Joe, thank you so much. Richard, let me ask you the final play. Take me through it.
Well, I'm the best corner in the game. When you try me with a sorry receiver like Crabtree, that's the result you're going to get. Don't you ever talk about me.
Who was talking about you?
Crabtree, don't you open your mouth about the best. Or I'm going to shut it for you real quick. L.O.B.
All right, and Joe, back over to you.
All right, well, we saw.
Many people responded negatively to Sherman's comments, saying his behavior was overwhelming. And in the reports that followed his statement, the word thug was spoken 625 times on TV on that Monday, according to Deadspin. In a USA Today article back in 2014, it reported that Sherman believes that thug is now an accepted way of calling somebody the N-word. This is a transcript from the Dennis and Callahan show after the game. The comments about Sherman are contradictory with his off-field behavior. Sherman graduated from Stanford University, where he excelled academically. He has no criminal history and helps underprivileged youth in the Compton area. Austin Green is a senior studying journalism at Ohio University. In our brief conversation, you will hear about his thoughts on how black men have been portrayed by the media and how it has influenced his opinions on African American men.
I think that most of my early views on black people were influenced by movies and music. One of my favorite movies growing up was Rush Hour, with the almost stereotypical character, Detective James Carter, played by Chris Tucker. I don't necessarily think that it was a bad depiction, but it certainly influenced my views. But I also grew up during the era when gangster rap took over the music scene. The artists like Snoop Dogg and Notorious B.I.G. and Tupac. The lyrics in their songs may have represented what they experienced in their early lives, but it also portrayed a negative image. You can say that news media is probably more influential on my views now than music or movies. We've had several high-profile cases lately, such as Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown. Mostly, it's the way the general public has reacted to these kind of stories that help shape my views. I think that the current discussion is not debated fairly by either side most of the time. People generally have like knee-jerk reactions based off of emotion instead of actively thinking about each side of the story.
What I learned from this project is that the black communities in the U.S. have been heavily impacted by the ways media position them. The media limit the human qualities of black men and restrict their opportunities in life in various ways. We can rarely find black men with higher profiles, who are talked about in the media or in literature. Know the existing circumstances there are surrounding the Black communities, particularly Black men, will raise our awareness whenever we see the media discussing issues related to Black men and help us think more about both sides instead of passively consuming the information and opinions coming from the media.